My hands shook as I watched the police car pull into my vineyard driveway. Behind it came Margaret's white Mercedes. After 27 years of working this land, my own neighbors were having me arrested. They called me a trespasser on my family's property. They had no idea what they just started. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. I was picking grapes in my vineyard when I saw the police car. My hands started shaking. Behind the police car came a white Mercedes. I knew that car. It belonged to Margaret Thornfield, the HOA president. My heart started beating very fast. Why were they here? What had I done wrong? I dropped my basket of grapes and walked toward them. The morning sun was shining, but I felt cold inside. Very cold. "Ma'am, step away from this property," the young police officer said. His name tag said Rodriguez. "We got a call about someone doing illegal farming on protected land." Protected land? This was my land. My family's land. "This is my property," I said. My voice was quiet and shaky. "This is my home." Margaret got out of her car. She looked angry. Her gray hair was perfect. Her clothes were expensive. She had only lived in our valley for 3 years, but she acted like she owned everything. "Elena, we have been patient with your little garden," she said. Her voice was mean. "But the homeowners association has rules. You cannot have a farm in our neighborhood." Little garden? I looked at my vineyard. Row after row of grapevines. I had been working here for 27 years. My father had planted these vines. My grandfather had started this vineyard in 1952. This was not a little garden. This was my life. "Officer, I need to show you my papers," I said. Tears started coming to my eyes. "I can prove this is my land." "Mrs. Vasquez," the older officer said. He looked kind. "We just need to check things out. Can you show us your property papers?" I was 62 years old. I had lived here my whole life. Now strangers were telling me to leave my own home. I felt so small and scared. "The papers are in my house," I said. Margaret laughed. It was a cold sound. "Elena, everyone knows you rent that little house from the Ashford estate. Don't lie to the police." The Ashford estate. My blood felt like ice when she said that name. Yes, the Ashford family had owned this valley once. But that was long ago. My grandfather had bought this land from them in 1952. We had owned it for 71 years. "I don't rent anything," I said. My voice got stronger. "I need to make some phone calls." I walked to my house. My legs felt weak. Behind me, I heard Margaret talking to the police. She was saying bad things about me. Each word hurt like a knife. Inside my house, I was surrounded by family photos. Pictures of my grandfather Vicente, my father Eduardo, my late husband Carlos. All the men who had worked this land before me. I needed to call my nephew Miguel. He was a lawyer in San Francisco. He had grown up playing in these grapevines. "Aunt Elena?" Miguel sounded sleepy. "It's only 7 in the morning. What's wrong?" "They want to take our vineyard," I cried into the phone. "The HOA called police. They say I'm stealing from my own land." Miguel was quiet for a long time. Then his voice got angry. "What did you say?" I told him everything. How Margaret had been fighting me for 3 years. How she complained about the smell of grapes. How she said farms didn't belong in nice neighborhoods. How the HOA treated me like I was a criminal. "Aunt Elena, do you have Grandpa Vicente's original papers? The ones from 1952. "Yes, but Miguel? Don't say anything to anyone until I get there. I'm coming right now." "And Aunt Elena?" "Get out the old maps from 1934. The ones Grandpa kept in the bottom drawer." 1934? Why was that date important? After Miguel hung up, I sat in my kitchen. Through the window, I watched the police officers walking through my vineyard. They were taking pictures. Margaret stood at the edge of my property talking on her phone. I thought about my grandfather Vicente. He came to California with nothing. He worked in other people's vineyards for 20 years. He saved every penny to buy this land from the Ashford family in 1952. I thought about my father Eduardo. He worked so hard to make our vineyard bigger and better. I thought about my husband Carlos. He helped me learn new ways to make wine. Every grapevine outside had a story. Every row meant years of hard work. This was not just property. This was our family's dream in America. I opened the bottom drawer of my father's old desk. Inside were old papers I had not looked at for many years. Yellow maps, water papers, and a leather folder with a ribbon. Inside the folder was something that made me stop breathing. It was a map from 1934. But not just any map. It was a complete map of all the land in Millbrook Valley. The county had made this map during the Great Depression. I looked at the map carefully. According to this old map, my family's land was not just the 40 acres where my house and vineyard sat. The original Vasquez property that my grandfather bought in 1952 was 800 acres. That included every single house where the HOA people now lived. My heart stopped. Then it started beating very, very fast. The Ashford family had not just sold my grandfather a small piece of land for grapes. They had sold him the entire valley. Somehow, over the years, everyone had forgotten. New houses were built. Land was sold. But no one remembered that it all belonged to my family. I spread the 1934 map on my kitchen table. I compared it to a new map I printed from the internet. The boundaries were clear. The Vasquez property went from Millbrook Creek in the west to Ridge Road in the east. From the oak trees in the north down to Highway 128 in the south. Margaret Thornfield's house, the house she paid $2.3 million for 3 years ago, was sitting right in the middle of my great-grandfather's vineyard land. Someone knocked on my door. I opened it. Officer Rodriguez was there. Margaret was behind him, looking angry. "Mrs. Vasquez, you need to pack your things," he said. He looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Thornfield has papers showing this property belongs to the Homeowners Association." "What papers?" I asked. Margaret stepped forward with a folder. "The HOA charter clearly says all empty land in the valley is community space. You have been a nice volunteer gardener, Elena, but now we need someone with more money to manage things properly." Volunteer gardener. She was trying to steal my property by calling me a volunteer on HOA land. "I need 15 minutes, I said quietly. 15 minutes to get my own papers. I closed the door and called Miguel again. "How fast can you drive?" "I'm already close. Maybe 10 minutes. "Why?" "Because they want to kick me out right now. And I found something in Grandpa's old papers that will change everything." I gathered all my important documents. The 1952 deed when my grandfather bought the land. The 1934 map. Tax papers going back many years. Water rights papers. And most important, a 1963 letter from the county office. The letter said clearly, "The Vasquez family owns 847 acres in Millbrook Valley." 847 acres. Miguel's car came up my driveway very fast, making dust clouds. My nephew jumped out of his car. Even though it was early morning, he looked like the successful lawyer he was. He wore a nice shirt and carried an expensive briefcase. "Aunt Elena, are you okay?" I hugged him tight. Miguel was 34 now, but in my arms he was still the little boy who helped me pick grapes every year. "I'm better now," I said. "But Miguel, you need to see this." I put the 1934 map on the hood of his car. Miguel's face changed from worried to amazed to very angry. "Aunt Elena, do you know what this means?" "I think so. But I need you to tell me for sure." Miguel looked at the police officers and Margaret. They were watching us and looking nervous. "Officers, I'm Miguel Vasquez, Mrs. Elena Vasquez's lawyer. Before you do anything else, I need to show you some legal papers about who owns this property." Officer Rodriguez looked relieved to have a lawyer there. "Of course, sir." Miguel opened his briefcase and took out a scanner and laptop computer. "Give me a moment to put together all the legal proof." While Miguel worked, I walked over to Margaret. She stood with her arms crossed. Her fingernails were perfect and expensive looking. "Margaret," I said quietly, "before this gets worse, I want you to know something. I never wanted to hurt you. When you moved to the valley, I brought you a bottle of my best wine to welcome you. When your husband was sick in the hospital last year, I brought you dinner every week." Margaret's face got a little softer. "Elena, I appreciate that, but—" "I'm not finished," I said. My voice got stronger. "You have spent 3 years trying to make me leave. You filed complaints with the county. You organized petitions. Now you called police to arrest me on my own property. The HOA rules are very clear. The HOA," I said, my voice getting loud, "was built on my land. Every single house in this valley, including yours, was built on property my grandfather bought 71 years ago." Margaret's face went white. "That's impossible. The development company showed us clear ownership papers." "The development company," Miguel said, looking up from his computer, "never checked who really owned the land before they sold it." He gave a printed paper to Officer Rodriguez. "This shows the complete history of who owned this property. It has copies of the original deed, the federal map, and county records. Mrs. Elena Vasquez owns 847 acres in Millbrook Valley. That includes all the land where the Millbrook Valley Homeowners Association houses are built." Nobody said anything. It was so quiet I could hear the wind in my grape leaves. Officer Rodriguez read the papers. His eyebrows went up higher and higher. The older officer looked over his shoulder and whistled quietly. "Mrs. Thornfield," Officer Rodriguez finally said, "these papers seem to show that Mrs. Vasquez owns not just this vineyard but the whole valley, including the land where your house sits." Margaret's perfect face cracked like a broken egg. "That can't be right. We paid over $2 million for our house. We have clear ownership papers from Ashford Development Company." "The Ashford Development Company," Miguel said, looking at his computer, "sold property they did not own. The Ashford family sold their land to Vicente Vasquez in 1952. Any sales after that needed permission from the Vasquez family." "But we never gave permission," I said. My voice was getting stronger. "Nobody ever asked us. Nobody ever called us. For 20 years, developers have been selling pieces of our property without asking us." This was huge. Margaret's house, the Hendersons' house, the new houses on the hill, the community center, the tennis courts, all of it was built on land that legally belonged to my family. "Mrs. Vasquez," the older officer said gently, "this is going to need lots of lawyers and judges to sort out. But based on these papers, it looks like you own this property." "Not just this property," Miguel corrected. "According to county records, Mrs. Vasquez owns the entire Millbrook Valley development. Every house here was built without proper ownership papers." Margaret sat down in her car. Her face was gray. "What does this mean for us? For our homes? Our money?" I looked out over the valley where I had lived my whole life. In the distance, I could see the red roofs of houses that had been built over the past 20 years. Each house was a family who had spent their life savings on what they thought was a legal purchase. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But Margaret, 3 years ago, instead of bringing lawyers and complaints and police to my door, you could have brought a bottle of wine and friendly conversation." Miguel was on his phone talking to a real estate lawyer in San Francisco. The police officers were calling their boss. Margaret sat in her car, probably calling her lawyer or her husband or just thinking about how big this problem was. I went back into my house and made coffee. Through my kitchen window, I watched the sun get higher over my vineyard. The same sun that had watched my grandfather plant his first grapevines. The same sun that had blessed harvest after harvest of grapes that had fed my family for 3 generations. My phone rang. Miguel was calling from outside. "Aunt Elena, I need to ask you something important," he said when I came onto my porch. "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but it meant everything. I owned an entire valley. I could kick out every family. I could tear down every house. I could make the land all grapes again. I could demand millions of dollars in back rent. I could sue everyone and make them pay for damages. I could bankrupt my neighbors and destroy their lives. But I thought about Mrs. Henderson, who brought me soup when I was sick last winter. I thought about the Johnson children, who helped me move water pipes during the hot summer. I thought about even Margaret, whose husband had thanked me with tears in his eyes for the meals I brought when he was recovering. "I want to do the right thing," I said. "But I also want them to understand that this is my family's land. This is our home." Over the next several hours, Miguel worked with lawyers, county officials, and people from the development company's insurance. The story that came out was one of lazy paperwork, bad research, and years of wrong assumptions. The Ashford Development Company had some old maps from the original Ashford family, but they never checked properly who owned what. They thought the 1952 sale to my grandfather was only for 40 acres where our house and vineyard sat, not the whole valley. When they started building houses in the early 2000s, they divided and sold land based on their wrong understanding. The families who bought homes in the valley did nothing wrong. They were victims of the development company's mistakes. But legally they were living on land they did not own. By afternoon, my quiet vineyard had become crazy with news reporters. News trucks filled my driveway. Reporters called every few minutes. The story had everything: family history, corporate mistakes, and the kind of property fight that made lawyers excited and homeowners worried. But the most important conversation happened just before sunset, when Margaret knocked on my door again. She looked tired. Her perfect hair was messy. Her expensive jacket was wrinkled. "Elena, can I come in?" I brought her to my kitchen table where the 1934 map was still spread out. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said without waiting. "Several apologies, actually." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She looked right at me for the first time in 3 years. "When James and I moved here, we fell in love with the valley. The rolling hills, the quiet mornings, how peaceful and established everything felt. But instead of appreciating what was already here, I tried to force my idea of what a community should look like." I waited and said nothing. "Your vineyard was beautiful, Elena. It was the heart of this place. But I was so worried about property values and HOA rules that I couldn't see it. I made you into the enemy when you were actually the reason we all wanted to live here. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Now I learned that you have owned this land longer than I have been alive. Your family built something lasting and meaningful here while I was just using it. Margaret. Let me finish, she said. I spent today talking to lawyers and real estate agents and insurance companies, trying to figure out how to protect my investment. But my investment was built on your land without your permission. I made money from your family's property for 3 years while treating you like a problem. She took out her checkbook. I want to start paying rent. For the past 3 years too. Whatever you think is fair. I looked at the checkbook, then at Margaret's face. Her offer was kind, but it missed the real point. I don't want your rent money, I said softly. What I want is for this valley to be a place where neighbors know each other's names. Where people understand that the land has a history. Where families can build something that lasts longer than property value reports. Margaret nodded slowly. What would that look like? We talked until the stars came out. We talked about community gardens and harvest festivals. We talked about keeping the farming character of the valley while respecting the families who had made their homes here. We talked about the difference between owning land and taking care of it. When Miguel joined us, we had created the plan for something new, a community land trust. This would let the existing homeowners stay in their houses while making sure the valley's farming heritage would be protected forever. It's complicated, Miguel warned us. We'll need environmental lawyers, real estate experts, tax specialists. This could take years to sort out legally. Good, I said. The best things usually take time. 3 months later, I stood in my vineyard as the morning sun painted the valley gold again. But this time, instead of feeling alone and attacked, I was surrounded by my neighbors, including Margaret, who had come to help with grape harvest. Mrs. Henderson's grandchildren ran between the grape rows, their laughter echoing off the hills. The Johnson family brought a picnic lunch to share. Even the new couple who moved into the house on Ridge Road came with work gloves and big smiles. The legal paperwork was still being worked out, but the important work had already begun. We had established the Millbrook Valley Community Trust. My family kept ownership of the land but gave long-term leases to the existing homeowners. In exchange, everyone agreed to help maintain the valley's farming character and environmental health. Margaret, it turned out, was very good at organizing things when she used her skills to help the community instead of enforce HOA rules. She coordinated volunteer schedules, established a community garden, and even started a small farmers market featuring produce from our expanded vineyard operations. Elena, she called to me from the next row over, where she was carefully putting clusters of grapes into harvest baskets. The Johnsons want to know if you would teach their teenagers about making wine. I smiled, thinking of my grandfather Vicente, who had dreamed of passing his knowledge to future generations. He got his wish, just not the way any of us had expected. Tell them we'll start with choosing grapes, I called back. Good wine starts with understanding the land. As the day went on and our harvest baskets filled with fruit that would become next year's wine, I realized that the morning when police came to my door had not been the beginning of an ending. It had been the beginning of something I had never dared to imagine. A community where the land was not just property to be owned, but a legacy to be shared. The valley remembered now. It remembered my grandfather's first vines, my father's dreams, and my family's decades of care. But it also remembered that the best legacies are the ones we build together, rooted in the soil of mutual respect and grown by the patient work of many hands. That evening, as the last of the harvest was finished and my neighbors went home to houses that now legally sat on my family's land but felt more like home than ever before, I poured myself a glass of last year's wine and walked out onto my porch. The valley spread out before me in the growing darkness, lights beginning to twinkle in windows where families were sharing dinner and stories of the day's work. In the distance, I could see Margaret watering the community garden she had helped create, and beyond that, the Johnson children playing in a yard that was technically mine but would always be theirs. This was what ownership really meant, I realized. Not the power to keep people out, but the responsibility to bring people in. Not the right to make money, but the duty to take care of things. Not the authority to control, but the wisdom to share. The valley was still mine according to the county deed office. But it belonged to all of us now, in the way that truly important things always do, not because we owned it but because we cared for it together. As the stars came out overhead, I raised my glass to the memory of my grandfather Vicente, whose small dream of growing grapes in a beautiful valley had somehow grown into something larger than any of us had imagined. A community rooted in the land, fed by history, and growing toward a future where the difference between mine and ours mattered less than the shared promise to tend what we had been given with grateful hands. The HOA had called the police on my vineyard, thinking they could drive me away from my own land. Instead, they had helped me discover that I own not just a vineyard but an entire valley, and more importantly, that the valley owned me right back in all the ways that truly matter. When I went to bed that night, I was no longer just Elena Vasquez, the woman whose neighbors had tried to kick her off her own property. I was Elena Vasquez, the woman who had chosen love over law, community over conquest, and sharing over selfishness. And in my dreams, I could hear my grandfather Vicente laughing with joy in the wind that blew through our grapevines, knowing that his small piece of the American dream had grown into something even more beautiful than he had ever dared to hope.